Britain's highest court ruled Tuesday that Prime Minister Boris Johnson's decision to suspend Parliament for 5 weeks in the crucial countdown to the country's Brexit deadline was illegal. Supreme Court President Brenda Hale said the suspension was unlawful because it had the effect of frustrating or preventing the ability of Parliament to carry out its constitutional functions without reasonable justification, end quote. The decision immediately prompted calls for Johnson to quit. House of Commons Speaker John Bercow said in a written statement that the ruling vindicated the right and duty of Parliament to meet at this crucial time to scrutinize the executive and hold ministers to account. Johnson, who is in New York for the UN General Assembly, has refused to say whether he will resign. Joining us to analyze all of this is director of the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom at the Heritage Foundation, Nile Gardiner. Nile, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure to have you back. Now, Johnson has claimed that he shut down Parliament to prepare for this new session. He was given a green light by Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth, and the Supreme Court claims the suspension of Parliament was unlawful, but did not rule on Johnson's motives. However, many in the UK are saying his motive was a contempt of democracy, an abuse of power. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that Boris Johnson's motive really is to deliver democracy. I mean, he's 100% committed to delivering the Brexit referendum result from 2016, which is the will of the British people. Prorogation or suspension of Parliament, as is known, is not unusual in British politics. It happens every single year. In this case, perhaps the prorogation was longer than typical, but this is perfectly normal parliamentary procedure. Multiple governments have used this, and I have to say that the Supreme Court decision here is being widely attacked by Brexiteers as an intervention by the Supreme Court in parliamentary affairs and procedure. Highly unusual, actually, and there's no precedent for this at all. And so Johnson has accepted the ruling, but he is saying that it's another example of those who are trying to stop Brexit from happening, basically acting in this case. And so he is calling for Parliament here to respect the will of the British people and move forward with Brexit on October the 31st. And Boris Johnson isn't going to be resigning. He isn't going to be going anywhere. He's going to be staying as Prime Minister.
There are all those calls for his resigning, and even I was stunned. I was watching the BBC, and there was Nigel Farage saying that Boris should at least offer his resignation to the Parliament, not leave, but offer the resignation, really out of respect to the body. Your thoughts?
Well, I think Boris Johnson should stay where he is and continue to lead the British country, the British people. He is a man who I think is firmly committed to delivering democracy, which is what the Brexit vote was all about. 17.4 million Britons voted to leave the European Union in 2016. Johnson is fully committed to doing so. Unfortunately, the Remainers in Parliament are doing everything they possibly can to try and block Brexit. And as the Attorney General was saying today, in his view, he said the current Parliament is dead. It simply doesn't respect the democratic will of the British people.
What do you make? The timeline isn't moving, as you said a moment ago. October 31st is the day.
Yes.
Will he find the support he needs in this, what you just said is a dead Parliament? The fact is they may be dead, but they're still holding their seats.
Yeah, that's true. And so Johnson has a couple of options here. Firstly, he's trying to get a deal with the European Union, an EU withdrawal agreement that will be acceptable to Parliament. That's going to be very, very difficult, of course, for the Prime Minister to get, not least because the majority of Parliament at the moment is against Brexit. The second option, of course, is to go around the demand of Parliament, requesting an extension to Article 50 of the European Union Treaty. Johnson has said he's not going to agree to that extension. He has said he's going to deliver Brexit on October 31st. I think he's absolutely right to promise to deliver Brexit on October 31st because Parliament here is not fulfilling the wishes of the British people. And that's the role of Parliament, to implement the democratic will of the British people. They're simply not doing that. Johnson is saying he's going to move forward with Brexit on October 31st, which is the legal default position.
Now, what about the suspension of Parliament? He's claiming, Boris Johnson is, that he will suspend Parliament again. Can he do that now, in light of this ruling?
Well, he can do so. I think he has the right to prorogue Parliament again. No doubt the courts will have their say again on this matter, but certainly as a Prime Minister he has the right to call for the suspension of Parliament once again, and we'll have to see what happens. Certainly, Johnson is holding that out as a possibility right now.
Well, if no deal can be made with the EU, what happens to the British economy? I mean, this was the same thing that was hanging over Theresa May's head.
Yeah. So if Britain exits under a no-deal scenario on October the 31st, Britain is going to do just fine outside of the European Union under a no-deal scenario. It simply means that Britain trades with the rest of the world under World Trade Organization terms. And Britain is the world's 5th largest economy. There's a huge amount of foreign investment continuing to flow into Britain in the Brexit era. I think Britain's going to do very, very well outside of the EU under a no-deal scenario. And already President Trump has indicated that the United States is going to fully support Great Britain, deal or no deal with the EU.
And this is a great segue. This is Boris Johnson and Donald Trump this week at the UN General Assembly talking about trade between the two countries. Watch.
We can quadruple our trade with UK, and we can, I think, really do a big job. Bob Lighthouser's here, our trade representative. Your trade representative is here, and they're already scheduled today to continue negotiations.
And I certainly hope that we can make a lot of progress quite fast on trade.
The UK, depending on its trade with the US, it could actually see a boost in its economy.
Yeah,
and other countries.
Absolutely. I think that a US-UK free trade deal would be great for both the US and the British economy. Already, over 1 million Britons rely upon US companies for their jobs, and vice versa. We have a huge amount of trade investment between the world's largest and 5th largest economies. A US-UK free trade deal would further advance that trade and investment across the Atlantic, creating a lot of additional jobs for British and American workers. So this is a win-win situation for both sides. President Trump is 100% committed to a US-UK free trade agreement. That's great news for Brexit Britain.
Yeah. The president ratcheted up the tough talk against China this week, also at the UN. I want to play a little bit of this for you and then get your reaction on how this plays in Britain. How important is the US cracking down on China for its trade violations? How does that affect the UK? Watch.
The American people are absolutely committed to restoring balance to our relationship with China. Hopefully, we can reach an agreement that will be beneficial for both countries. But as I have made very clear, I will not accept a bad deal for the American people.
The implication here is he won't accept a bad deal for the rest of the world either, because if the United States were to accept it, really the rest of the world would have to go along. Yeah,
I think Britain has an interest in China playing by the rules that everyone else follows on the world stage. And China has been playing by the rules for many, many decades. And President Trump has said enough is enough. And certainly I think the United Kingdom would benefit from China changing its behavior. And also I think the United Kingdom would benefit from a China that also does not seek to steal intellectual property, for example, or infiltrate the security networks through 5G, for example.
Right.
And so I think that it's in Britain's interest for a China to play by the rules that everyone else plays by on the international stage. At the same time, though, I think that Great Britain would be concerned, though, about a larger trade war that could possibly come in. So certainly the UK would like to see a US-China trade deal, but the Chinese really have to make significant concessions for that to happen.
I want to shift gears slightly, but this is related, and it's often not reported this way. There was a lot of media attention on the climate summit this week on the edges of the UN meeting, the General Assembly meeting. Greta Thunberg, that 16-year-old activist from Sweden, had this to say about climate change. Watch.
You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering, people are dying, entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth.
Nile, I want your thought, because she subsequently, along with some other teens, listed countries that they would like to see act on climate change. Notable on that list for its absence was China.
Yes.
Your thoughts on what impact this could have on trade as well as human rights using this climate agenda, if you will?
Yeah, well, I think that China is the world's biggest polluter. And yet you don't see calls for China to act. All of the focus is upon the United States. There's a great deal of America bashing that goes on among climate activists, of course. And there's a lot of anti-capitalist sentiment as well that is there. And without a doubt, I think that these climate activists should be focusing upon the real polluters in the world, especially upon China. Who, without a doubt, do more actually to pollute the world than any other country.
Yeah, no, it was remarkable that they would carve out China. Yes. And as someone, a long-time UN reporter told me this week, had Greta Thunberg and these other climate activists tried to do this protest in Beijing,
yes,
they would be quickly rounded up and silenced. They wouldn't have to worry about, doing the rounds of the talk shows.
That's the irony of it, isn't it? Really? And they're not focusing on China, funnily enough, actually.
Yeah. I want to move on before we go and talk about Iran. Again, Iran was a centerpiece of discussion at the UN this week. The President Trump raised it. I want your reaction to this and what we could be seeing next.
All nations have a duty to act. No responsible government should subsidize Iran's bloodlust. As long as Iran's menacing behavior continues, sanctions will not be lifted. They will be tightened.
Are the sanctions working, Nile? And what is the reaction to the rest of the world when they hear that?
Well, I think the sanctions are working, actually. And what you're seeing with the Iranian regime is a desperate regime lashing out. It's a regime that's in serious trouble. The Iranian economy is sinking to its knees. Yeah. You have soaring inflation, rising unemployment. You have economic growth that is negative in Iran. This is an economy in deep, deep trouble. US sanctions are hitting very, very hard. And so I would argue that the maximum pressure regime is having the effect that's intended. It's weakening Iran's ability, actually, to, in the long term, I think, act as the world's biggest state sponsor of international terrorism. But you are seeing the Iranian regime lashing out, trying to intimidate, trying to get those sanctions lifted. We mustn't in any way lessen our guard, reduce the sanctions that are in place. We mustn't follow, for example, the advice of Emmanuel Macron.
I was about to say, Macron's trying to facilitate a deal here and has brought everybody back to the table, including the US, he claims.
Yeah, exactly. Macron is proposing some kind of $15 billion bailout fund for Iran, which is the typical French approach to these things, which is one of complete, utter appeasement, even surrender, frankly.
Well, we'll keep our eye on this, but I agree with you. This is a dangerous regime in the region and the world. Thank you, Nile, for being here. You can also follow the work of Nile Gardiner at the Heritage Foundation.